Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of the GCS Podcast. We have the wonderful Atiyyah Ferouz here this time for a bit of a deep dive into the world of cannabis cultivation, specifically GMP cannabis cultivation. And then, luckily, Atiyyah's probably one of the most well-rounded, internationally experienced cannabinoid producers in the world, I'd say. Atiyyah's kindly offered to walk us through some of the nuances, some of the challenges, and then we're going to have a bit of a roundup really of sort of current events that are impacting the cannabis industry at the moment, and then what it means for you as entrepreneurs, business owners, researchers, investors, and everything else in between, basically. So it's just become your 5-year anniversary of starting your own consultancy, Atiyyah, and I don't know if maybe that's a good place to start us off as to a little quick background as to how you got into cannabis, and then we'll talk a bit about your incredible experience and all the wonderful companies, all the wonderful cannabis you've produced, and we'll do a little walkthrough if that sounds good to you. Thank you for coming.
Yeah, sounds good. Thank you for having me. So I mean, AgCan Consultancy is hitting its 5-year. We were just talking about that, which is crazy to me because I can't really believe it's been 5 years since I started working for myself. But I started in the cannabis industry about 2.5 years prior to that. So basically when Canada legalized in 2018, which is actually just almost past the 7-year anniversary for that happening a few days ago. I had a master's in genetic engineering and plant biotechnology. I was currently working in the food industry at the time in quality, regulatory, kind of just generally speaking, the technical side of things. And I decided that I wanted to make a bit of a career change and decided to move into cannabis. And the big pull, to be honest, was the job in tissue culture. I think it's quite rare that you actually get to do what you did in grad school as a full-time job. I don't think many people with a science grad degree get to do that. So I decided to start working at Agmedica Bioscience, which is a facility located in Chatham, Ontario, that's still there. And I became tissue culture lab manager, and I did that for a little bit, and I branched a little bit into doing some other work there, like business development and a few other items and projects I was working on. So then when I got the opportunity to run essentially a 1 million square foot farm, I was covering a lot of stuff there, operations, assisting with some of the cultivation items, was doing quality stuff, regulatory stuff, sales and business development, a bit of everything. I kind of leaped at it and got a lot of really great experience there. And I sort of just realized that I had hit at that point in time in the industry, kind of the maximum uptake that I could take. I was the most experienced person at my company, and I felt that I need to find a way to develop myself. But I had a lot of offers from other cannabis companies, and they had the exact same problem. The industry was so fresh and there was really no one else I could learn from. And I'm the kind of person who needs constant engagement and constant development. Continually developing myself is one of the most important things to me in the world. So I kind of just went on a limb and I was like, you know what? Consulting might just be an option for me to do, because I had done a few little small consulting projects here and there previously. And I thought it was a great way to maybe not go into companies where everyone knew more than I did, but to expose myself to a lot of different types of projects, different cultivation systems, different countries, was a great way for me to level myself up. So I launched in 2020, at the very end of 2020, got my first client, as we discussed, January 2021. And then it's been crazy ever since, as you know, changing continents every couple of weeks. As my mom says, I change continents like other people change outfits. So yeah.
Well, thank you for making the time to speak with us here, especially given all your travels and journeys. Where in the world are you at the moment, for everyone that doesn't know you so well? And you've got quite a busy schedule coming up from what we've already discussed. Yeah.
I just got back from Thailand. I was there this past Friday. I own a company there, so I go there quite often, and I used to live there as well. And so I'm in Australia at the moment, but I've only actually come back, I think between trips, I'm going to have about 8 days here, maybe 9 days here, because I fly back to Thailand next week. And I do a week in Thailand. I'm speaking at the Asia International Hemp Expo on both of the conference days. And then I'll be flying from there to Japan for a week. I'm very excited for that one, my first time in Japan, which is surprising when I tell people that it's my first time in Japan. Everyone's like, should be a lot of fun. So I'll do the conference there as well, which is the Japan International Hemp Expo. I spoke at that virtually last year, and so this year they're actually having a physical event, and I'll do speaking there for 2 days as well. And I'll also, I'm sure, do some really fun stuff in the city, and then I will fly back to Australia. So I think I'll be hitting my 60th flight this year in the next week or two.
Racking up the air miles here. Yeah. Very impressive. So maybe a good place to start is somewhat chronologically, and then we'll get to talking about industry stuff and all the exciting things as well that are going on in the world. Would you be able to tell us a little bit about the typical sort of consulting projects that you see or that people come to you for, and the kind of like problem ecosystem that you find when you go to some of those companies? Because we've talked a bit about this before, but I think that's really the sort of, that's a very kind of hidden realm almost, what goes on within some of these EU GMP cannabis facilities, the challenges of setting them up and running them. So I think that everyone's quite comfortable with now the idea of clinics prescribing cannabis, but not everyone's quite aware of the nuances and challenges that come with the development process, and then the heavy overheads that come with that before you do actually end up profitable and it becomes part of a business. So what's it like when you first sort of engage with some of the new clients, and what are some of the challenges that you typically see?
Yeah, so for me in particular, I mean, I do a really wide range of consulting because I have like a tons of different like levels of experience in different things, and they kind of all like tie together. I've, worked at so many companies where I'm doing everything, like running pretty much every department. And so it makes it really great because people get this like kind of, I'm like a Swiss Army knife for a consultant. You need consulting in cultivation, you need consulting in post-harvest, you need GACP, you need GMP, you need tissue culture, you need management consulting. All those are things that I do. And so the kinds of clients that we get really depend on which of the service offerings they're looking for, but we mainly do consulting in 3 branches. So operations-based consulting, which can be cultivation and post-harvest at very large commercial scale, or the idea of scaling things up is kind of my, I'd say, main focus area. But generally speaking, just like consistency. And a big part of the cultivation and post-harvest consulting that I do is making them GMP compliant. So for standards, for example, GACP covers cultivation, and then moving to GMP on the post-harvest side. But I still implement a lot of practices in the cultivation side that are, I would say, like more GMP related, like cleaning validations and things like that. And funnily enough, the EMEA, the European Medicines Agencies, they did just update their GACP standard to include cleaning validation and a few other items from the GMP side of things. So I really feel like very funny that they're doing this, because I've been doing this for ages, just in my own consulting, which is to sort of take some of the preciseness and control and tracking and record keeping from the GMP side and like shift it a bit further back into the GACP side. So we do a lot of operations consulting like that. And then the other big area is just quality consulting. So it's a huge service we launched this year, but GACP prep and certification. So we actually prepare people for full compliance to WHO and EMEA GACP. And then we do a certification against them as well. GACP is like an uncontrolled standard. So realistically speaking, anyone can certify you against it. But of course, as somebody who's like a recognized auditor in the space, I'm a registered certified auditor, I'm a trained GMP auditor, things like that, people feel a bit more comfortable having, of course, me do it than, having themselves do it or someone else. And then we're very price competitive compared to the other options, which are the larger certifying bodies, which will run, let's say $20,000, $30,000 a year. We're much more cost effective than that. So that's been a very like large service that we've offered, I would say. On the GMP side, we do full prep for GMP, so getting people completely ready for their GMP certification. I myself am a certified pharmaceutical GMP professional, as well as a trained GMP auditor. So those have been very heavy. We've had a lot of interest in that service because I think everyone who's super keen to get on the international market and has the funding to do so is going for GMP. We have dozens of people every year reach out to us for GMP certification and getting prepared for that, because everybody wants to have the ability to sell into the largest buying market right now, which is Germany, of course. And there's so many other European markets coming online as well that it's kind of a safe bet as an investment into your future as a production facility, is to become GMP compliant, or at a bare minimum GACP compliant, and then kind of plug into like our network. The last area, of course, is in tissue culture consulting as well, which we do some projects in here and there. But I think that across all of the clients, and the thing that I would say consistently that I see across facilities, regardless of how they engage us, is just the number one issue I find is kind of a lack of having a defined procedure and following it. So even for something like, production, you should know how you're producing your product, and it should generally be the same every single time. And the reason why that's important is for consistency of the product, quality of the product, but more importantly, and I would say especially in such a price compressed industry, it's costing. So if you normally machine trim your product and then you do a hand trim touch up and you pack it, there's a specific costing associated with that. You can't all of a sudden decide one day, okay, well, now we're going to hand trim everything, especially in a country where the cost of labor is quite high. Your cost of goods and your inputs have now gone up exponentially. So, one of the first things we do with a lot of clients when we're doing larger scale consulting with them is ask them to show us their cost of goods and their financial models. And many of them don't have one. And to me, that's really crazy, because how can you run a business if you don't know it's profitable? How can you sell something if you don't know that you're making money off of each, you're selling 10 grams of cannabis? Is it costing you more to make it than it is to sell? And we've had multiple clients where when we did the math for them, they actually were just losing money. So they're producing product and running a facility, and they're continually chipping away at the reserve funds, basically, till essentially they'll go bankrupt. And so at that point in time, the consulting does go back to consulting on the process and changing cultivation and changing post-harvest. But a lot of it's just general business consulting, to be honest. Like, hey, here's how you run a business. You have to know, what's profitable. You have to know what makes sense. You have to know, everyone else is selling your product for this price point, and that's the market average. Don't plan on selling your product for 3 times the price. We get clients all the time that show us their projected financial models when they're in an emerging market or they're starting a new facility. And the price they want to sell it for in Europe is like 3 times what the pharmacies are buying it for. And I'm like, this is not sustainable, because you're not going to be able to sell at this price, frankly. So having a good understanding of, what your target is and working backwards is really important in an industry like this, where pricing is so important and it's so cost competitive. There's been severe price compression in Australia, price compression in Germany. A lot of the markets are getting more cramped down. So honestly, the companies that I find do well are the companies that are very lean, the companies that know where they can outsource activities to a different person or a co-packer or a third party and save themselves some money, and the companies that have a really high degree of control over their entire process, and then it's repeatable and then it hits the mark every single time.
How would you say overall, in terms of the market of GMP producers, what portion are in that struggling to find the profitability and get the right efficiency of their processes in place versus profitable, functional, and have that foundation of longevity, perhaps? And what's the sort of breakdown there?
I would say for GMP, because when we look at GMP producers, it's a very, very small fraction of the total number of cannabis producers. This is a handful of groups basically per country, essentially. Portugal obviously had the most number of, or has, I'm not really sure, the most number of GMP certified producers. And then of course they had a very big issue this year, which has caused a lot of problems and license suspensions. So those groups, because they are typically more well-funded, and they typically do have larger executive boards, and they typically do have, a CFO and stuff like that. Majority, I would say, are really aware of their costs and costing. Let's say maybe 70 to 80%. But if you look at cannabis producers on the whole across, and I mean, we consult we've had clients on every continent where cannabis is legal, so we've really seen a lot of different scale. We've seen a lot of problems. We've seen a lot of different approaches to cultivation, styles of cultivation, sizes of companies. In the general cannabis realm, the amount of companies that I feel really and truly know their cost of production, really understand how to execute procedures, follow them, really see quality as not this necessary evil, but a really integral part of their process, and have, I would say, a strategy established. We talk to so many clients that basically say, I want to sell to everybody. And that's not a strategy. You have to have, here are the 3 countries I want to target, or 2 countries I want to target. Here is the time and energy that I want to put into each of these. So well-run cannabis companies on the whole, it's got to be less than 5%. It's quite rare. I mean, obviously as a consultant, people are coming to you because they're having problems. You're not going to see, the Rolls Royce of cannabis companies coming to you who need consulting. Of course, I have some very fantastic clients that are running really, really well, and they're just having me consult on a small piece of that puzzle. But predominantly you're getting people that don't know what they're doing, or they're fresh to the industry. So we obviously see quite a bit of just things where it's, like you said, lost leadership, or not exactly having strategy and planning at the level that they should for how much money has been invested. And there's really no, it's just kind of sad too, to be honest, because so many people get into cannabis because they're extremely passionate about it, but you're running a business, and like any other business, having the basic principles of that and the financials behind that, and kind of inundating yourself with essentially how it works in most most industries. Those kinds of just business best practices are something that I find severely lacking. We see people all the time, paying executive salaries that are not in scale with how much money the company is making. We see people who are frivolously spending money on marketing and other things that don't make any sense, and they can't they can't pay for their product to get remediated because they don't have enough money to get the batch out the door. So just a lot of mismanagement, and it comes from being in an industry that essentially is the green rush. Anybody who wants to, come into something super lucrative and exciting, they're running into cannabis. And so we don't have people who have maybe the best experience in producing a pharmaceutical product, in producing a packaged good. You have people coming from industries that have no relation whatsoever, and they may be very passionate about it. But the concept of running these, facilities, and these very complex facilities, when you look at also the regulatory requirements in many countries, it's a lot. And it's something that there are very limited number of people in the cannabis space that I feel can do it very well.
I've definitely seen that same issue, to be honest, here. And what I think, well, I've got a few notes here of interesting things you mentioned there, particularly around who the sort of like cannabis industry attracts, first of all. And I think that's a great point that you've highlighted there, is with the sector being so new, there's not often many people with the experience of actually having done it, achieved it, and done it successfully. And oftentimes it is a lot of newcomers coming into the industry who maybe have almost sort of rose-tinted glasses of what the sector's like, what the cultivation processes are like, what compliance means, what maybe some of the medical applications are. What would you say is the kind of like biggest rookie error that you see a lot of cannabis operations making in that inception process, early sort of foundations process?
I think it's just grossly underestimating how much work everything is going to be, and also like not getting the right people in. Like, we really love projects that are a fresh, brand new build, and we get to engage the client from the beginning, because then it goes well and we're able to give guidance on how to design your facility, how to do this and that. That's not the majority of our projects. The majority of our projects are what I call salvage projects, which is that somebody has started a company in cannabis. They've had no commercial growing experience whatsoever. They've never ever set foot in a GMP facility or like a high-end facility, and they decide, this is what I want to do, which is fantastic. But instead of engaging people early enough in the plan to design the facility correctly, in one area in particular, facility design would be the dry rooms. We find all those are like 90% of the time they're not done correctly. Engaging someone early to help you with that, you kind of muddle along yourself, and then you get to a point where you're in a bad financial spot and you're like really desperate, and that's when you come in. And it's kind of like the same thing when where you're tutoring somebody or teaching somebody. You don't want to come in after they've already made a lot of mistakes and failures. The highest chance of success is to engage someone early to teach you and guide you along the process from the get-go. But I think a lot of people think it's easier than it's going to be, or we have a lot of cultivators that have grown a very small number of plants. Growing a couple hundred, even 1,000 plants, very, very different than growing 40, 50, 60,000 plants, because it's actually a lot less about your cultivation knowledge and more about operations management and your ability to handle scheduling and systems. And so you're really looking at system management more than anything else. We can basically give somebody, here's the protocols you should use for cultivation, here's the light, here's the temperature, here's the humidity for your facility, here's the fertilizer, and it's essentially automatic. And so all they really need to do is actually to do the management of the personnel and of the consumables and the inventory. And that's actually where we find a lot of cultivators struggle. And I've joined a group in Canada, and they actually are, I think it's, I'm going to say it wrong. It's like the Federation of Cannabis Farmers, I think. I'm going to hope I said that right. Andrew's going to kill me if he sees this. So I just joined their board of directors or advisory board. I can't remember the name of it, but they're going to be launching a leadership program and a management training program, because this is like the core problem we have with these really passionate head growers, really passionate people who love growing cannabis, but their soft skills for management, not always there. Their ability to do high level operations management at very complex facilities and run, 15, 20 rooms at the same time and ensure the product comes out within the specs every single time, especially for a GMP project, there's very little leeway, right? The potency has to hit where it's supposed to hit, the micro has to hit where it has to hit. Those are things that people are lacking quite heavily. So it's definitely a very well-known industry gap, is just kind of the management and leadership and really knowing how to, I think, tame these processes and get your staff through them and get your plants through them, basically, without too much of a hiccup or too much of a deviation from the regular route.
Over the last couple of years then, Tia, what kind of like changes have you seen perhaps, or like evolutions have you maybe seen? It sounds like some of the companies taking the more managerial side of things a bit more seriously as opposed to like just specific individual plant cultivation. What other sort of trends have you seen since sort of like 2018 when it's kind of emerging to now, and how we sort of transition? Do you see much of a evolution or much sort of adaptation? Where are we sort of up to with some of those companies?
Yeah, I think like, Canada was obviously such an amazing industry to work in. It was obviously the first like very large country to do both a recreational and a medical legalization. And it's funny, like when I go to Canada and when I deal with groups there, they still really complain about the regulations a lot. Canada's is one of the best cannabis regulations in the world. There is not a lot of stuff that's comparable. The level of access that you have as an adult there, the freedom of choice that you have, the safety and consistency of the products, the lack of requirement for GMP. We don't have GMP in Canada. There are GMP producers in Canada who sell to Europe, but GPP, which is what we've developed in Canada, is much lower level. It's much more attainable. It is attainable for somebody who is a small company to produce edibles, to produce oils. That is not something you can do in Europe. It's cost you so much money to GMP for your facility, to build to that standard, to do the regular monitoring, stability testing, all of that stuff. So Canada really has such an amazing industry. And the evolution that we've seen there and the cultivators that have survived are the ones who are very good at predicting trends and also who play in the global market. So the biggest trend that we've seen, one of my very big core focus areas, is really looking at the cannabis industry across the entire world and not looking at it just in your own country. And I mean, of course, if your country is not allowed to trade, like the US, for example, it's a completely different ballgame. But if you're in countries that allow you to do foreign trade of products and you can move things in and out of your country or to other countries, this opens up so much more market cap, the client base, the amount of money you can make, the opportunities that you have, it's just infinite, right? Compared to, just being stuck in your own local market. So you'll see from 2018 till now, the amount of producers in Canada that were getting GACP, that were getting GMP, that were looking to kind of move into the European markets, the Australian market, stuff like that, is increased exponentially. All of my new clients that I'm consulting in the Caribbean, in Asia, in Australia, everybody is like, how are we getting product and how are we going to move it into these hubs where they're buying product? And so to me, that's very fascinating because I've always envision down the line the cannabis industry to mimic every other large scale industry, which is that when you have globalization, you develop hubs. So you have certain countries that become very well known for producing biomass. So any country that's going to have a low cost of labor and a lot of sun, they're a biomass producer. Then you look at countries where you need to have these really high-end pharmaceuticals. So countries where you already have a lot of pharmaceutical production, like in Europe, make perfect sense for that. Because I mean, one of the challenges I have when I even create a GMP facility outside of Europe is that we can't find staff. We can't find a QP essentially. And we can't find someone that has the experience of managing a pharmaceutical system or managing pharmaceutical quality management system. Mm-hmm. And it becomes very difficult. So, eventually certain countries are going to settle out to being kind of owners of pieces of the supply chain or specialized in pieces of the supply chain because of the advantages or the economics in that country. And so I find that people who are doing very well are really able to look at, what are the options here available to me? Okay, well, my domestic price for flour has gone down. Can I buy flour from overseas, from somewhere where it's cheaper to produce it, bring it in, and then sell it? And so those are all people that I see they're keeping their head above water and continuing to float. Anybody who's really recognized the benefits of playing in the international space, who knows it really well. We do a lot of consulting on that, just general international strategy. I keep up to date with like pretty much all the major regulations in the world and what's going on. So we know how to get product from point A to point B. Like I can slice and dice that any which way. And so we have a lot of clients that come to us and say, look, I want to get this product from here to there. Like, how do we get it done? And we make sure everything in the pathway is set up for them. And then we assist them with that. And so those are the clients and the people that I think are really future-proofed and like ready for any changes that come in the cannabis industry. Because as we grow, all that's going to happen is that more countries are going to legalize, which means both things happen, right? More producers become available and more buyers become available. So you have to really be ahead of that and be really well poised and placed and ready from a regulatory perspective, compliance perspective, to get into the new countries as they legalize and are able to take product, or you will fall behind as we continue to onboard more producers every single few months, right? Someone's legalizing, they've got cannabis production.
How are companies trying to differentiate themselves at the moment from the kind of rest of the crowd that's out there? Because as you say, it's like internationally, there's a lot of I guess, competition now for distribution across that international market. People are looking internationally. Where do you think the differentiating factors really sort of lie at the moment, and what are companies doing to try and like innovate and bring more efficiency to their processes? Because obviously cultivation can be quite, I guess, environmentally impactful, but also in terms of like energy costs, things like that. What sort of like innovations are you seeing companies go for as well, whilst trying to differentiate themselves and maybe don't bring down some of the costs or overheads?
Yeah, we're seeing a lot more automation for sure. That's like a big thing. I mean, one of the pieces of equipment, there's so many like cool things that have come out that I really like. One technology area, I guess I will say, is just remediation is quite a big one. So actually all of the new clients we have for GMP, when they're in an emerging market, we strongly advise them to onboard a remediation technology. The reason being that when you want to sell products into markets like Europe, UK, etc., Australia, they have very tight microbial standards, with I think the UK being the tightest, then Australia, then Germany. And then Germany and Canada actually typically use the same standard. So our law in Canada allows us to utilize a variety of standards. The European Pharmacopoeia is one of them. The US Pharmacopoeia is another. But quite heavily, I would say people use the European Pharmacopoeia. And so we actually have the same standard as Germany would have, depending again if you're doing 5.18 B or C. But the issue is we can irradiate our products. UK, you can irradiate your products. Australia, you can irradiate your product. Germany, you cannot. So they want you to have fairly clean product, but they don't want you to use any technology that involves gamma irradiation to do so. And it's because there's specialized certificates required in Germany that you have to have. And they're quite lengthy. I think it's 9 to 12 months to get them. You have to get one for each product. So it just becomes a supply chain nightmare. And so the use of remediation technologies and acting as a remediation hub for other cultivators is a very big business. And it is something that is like highly profitable if done correctly in the right way. And so I think that's an area that I find that is always good to be mindful of. Remediation will be needed for the foreseeable future. Cannabis is a medical product. There are biological standards we have to hit. And so being able to offer that as a service and to do it on your own product opens up a lot more doors. I can't tell you how many times product lands in Germany, gets tested there, it doesn't hit on the microbial standards, and it becomes stranded essentially. Like it's there and you can't take it anywhere else. And so that's a very, very big loss. And so being very malleable and having kind of a, what happens worst case scenario and a solution for that on every single step of an international supply chain is the only way I think to make it work. And so as you know, I have multiple companies. So one of my other companies, we do basically import products into Germany, into Australia, stuff like that. And we help clients with their international strategy. And we also buy product as well for certain supply chains. And so as a result of that, I constantly have to have a lot of redundancy in my supply chain so that, I'm buying flour from somebody, that's great. I actually in that country have 10 other producers just in case I need them or for other options. Then we move into, the GMP co-packing, and we have to pack the product in a GMP facility. We have a handful of those on board that we work with. And so allowing us to have all these different redundancies and, innovating in that way, in fortifying your supply chain, in creating essentially safety nets around your supply chain. That's what I'm seeing happening a lot in the industry. The people who are getting more intelligent about how to move in the industry, who are seeing all the rapid changes in the trends, those are definitely areas where I see people making a lot of adjustments and changes, but otherwise operating relatively normally.
Maybe a good time then to ask you a little bit about the ICQSA, which is your baby in terms of standards for some of the companies and the gaps that you see within the industry at the moment, and especially internationally, how some of those maybe don't quite line up or they're a little bit sort of incongruent. Do you want to walk us through the International Cannabis Quality Standards Association tier and maybe a little bit about the rationale for that as well? So I think that's something is super valuable that we haven't quite touched on yet that a lot of people should be paying attention to.
Yeah, so the ICQSA started, I think, last year, I want to say. And so essentially what we did was we just wanted to get together a group of industry stakeholders who were, passionate about moving the industry forward, and we wanted to develop working groups and develop some best practice guides. That has been so severely delayed because, here's note to everybody, never run for companies. It's a bad idea. It is a bad idea. So we've had to kind of downshift from as many working groups as we like to host and publishing the guides at the speed at which we wanted to publish them at. But it's actually been nothing but beneficial, because I spent so much time since I started the association till now engaging with other associations who do very similar work. And so that allows me to sort of build up strength and backing behind what we're doing. But the idea behind the ICQSA is really just to get together people who are industry stakeholders, who are passionate about the cannabis space, who are passionate about globalization of the cannabis space. And so the working groups that we have developed and been working on are cannabis grading, so development of a grading guide that can be used for all products, that will be consistency across the board. So if the product is graded in Canada against it versus Thailand versus South Africa, you should yield the same result. And then, of course, the patient education guide, which Chris is helping me develop. So that's, again, something where, it's going to be something developed that can be given to the public, that can be used for some kind of consistency. And in that case, that one, the sort of impetus behind that one was just the knowledge that we don't really see any kind of education guides being published by any government organizations that are robust enough to really help somebody. We still feel that many consumers and patients are just lost, essentially, and they don't get the information they need, and it's not condensed down in a really easy to understand and digest format. And so those are the two that we have active right now, which we've got to make some progress on. It's been a busy year, but we did also host a conference in May in South Africa. So that was actually a lot of the end of last year and beginning of this year was focused towards that. So we joined forces with the Cannabis, I'm going for the name, Cannabis Law Journal. And so we joined forces with them and Sean Hawking there, and we developed a small conference that we had in South Africa. It was not, a huge deal. It was kind of an invite-only kind of small event. And that was actually focused on, it's called the International Cannabis Symposium. And that's focused on law, trade, and policy and standards and things along those lines. And so we had that event in May, and we're actually having another satellite event for that in November, which is in actually 3 weeks in Sydney in Australia. And the ICQSA and Sean have come together to kind of build up these kind of small satellite events to get the right people in the rooms, to get people together who can then, again, get the guides. Because, I could publish a guide tomorrow, but the biggest thing is to have a lot of industry backing behind it and a lot of consensus around the information inside of it to have a very high degree of uptake. We need to unify together as an industry. It's the whole point of the association, is to bring people together to drive change and move it in the right direction. And so that's kind of the focus of the ICQSA, and why we came together as an association was to really push all of certain agendas forward for changes we want to see. Longer term, larger scale, what we want to contribute in the ICQSA is the development of a globalized cannabis standard. It is really complex that everyone has different microbiological standards. It is very complex that some people are GMP and some people are not. And, what you're allowed to sell and what you're not allowed to sell depends on the country that you're working with. It's a lot. And even for me, somebody who works in it day in, day out, it's a lot to remember. And so we really just want to kind of, as much as possible, get to kind of an apples to apples comparison. So when we look at, GACP, it is used for cultivation, but it's not specific to cannabis. And it really doesn't cover a lot of the important things that I think are important in cannabis production. So the development, for example, of a cultivation standard that a lot of different countries and groups and stakeholders could agree on, and then to certify people against, so that when you buy a product from Thailand versus Canada versus Bahamas versus wherever, you're getting kind of the same product because the checks and the certification have been done. This is not like a new idea by any means. I came from the food industry. This, to me, actually, the inspiration from it came from GFSI, which is a global food safety initiative. Essentially, food and products have been traded all over the world for ages. And it got to the point where, groups got together and said, look, there needs to be some standard that you all adhere to, because it's way too complicated to deal with every single individual country stuff, to dig into everyone's individual regulations and to figure out what that means for them and what that means for me and how it aligns to my standards is a bit of a headache. And so they developed GFSI. And under GFSI, there's actually several schemes depending on what part of the supply chain you're in and what you do. And so as somebody who worked in food, and I worked at one of the largest dairy companies in the world, we had all of our facilities pretty much established against this GFSI initiative. And the scheme for the facility would depend. Some of them were more advanced. Some of them were a little bit, if it was more close to the raw material production, it was a lower standard. If it was more finished product, it was a higher standard. And so we have to manage these certifications. And it just meant that we could sell to anybody, basically. Every country in the world was aware of the standard, and they were aware of what it meant, and they were aware of how stringent it had to be to meet it. And so it really opened up a lot of doors for us. And it's exactly what we want to have in the cannabis industry. I want to develop a standard, or work towards developing a standard that says, we have this now, anybody can buy our flower because it's a really well-established, well-known standard, and people have a lot of confidence in it. And so I've been involved in development of other standards in cannabis, and seen them kind of crash and fail. So I'm not in too much of a rush to publish something, next month that doesn't have the uptake. The uptake of it, the consensus, the industry acceptance is really important when you do things like best practice guides, standards, et cetera, because you really want them to have impactful change and not to just be something that sits on someone's shelf that doesn't really, make a big change with the industry.
You mentioned their events. Maybe an opportunity to segue slightly to then, I think you're probably, out of all the people I know, someone who's most well attended the cannabis events of the globe. Having been to all of the events internationally that I think are worth naming, what are your sort of like go-to tactics now for trying to like go in there and find the exact people you want to speak to and get the most out of those sort of social opportunities? Because I think everyone's pretty easy with connecting online on LinkedIn with each other, but when it actually comes to like, I've traveled miles now, I've got on all the planes, trains, automobiles, and now I'm at the event. How do you like to try and get the most out of those, and where do you see sort of cannabis events maybe like evolving as well? Do you think there'll be more online? Do you think there'll be more people preferring that sort of like offline kind of human interaction? Where do you sort of see it going, and what's your routine now for going in there and having a sort of impactful, high value experience when you do go to these events? Because obviously it's very easy to also just sit on the wall and maybe not engage with everyone. What's the Atiyyah tactics that you've got at the moment?
Yeah, the Atiyyah tactics. I actually get asked this question a lot. I get a lot of like people, and I've done it before where I've done like mentoring essentially and done it like starting to do more like leadership training and stuff like that. And a lot of it does talk about networking and connecting with people, because we just talked about that before we came on the recording. But I've in my entire consulting company is like people sending me clients basically. I mean, I don't advertise. My marketing budget is $0. I don't do anything with marketing. I actually just got a new assistant, and I'm going to be having them do some social media posts here and there. It's really like such low priority on my list. And the reason is, especially with consulting, there's a lot of trust. These clients are putting a lot of trust into you. So someone finding you off the street is never going to be as easy to sign, for example, like a lead, than someone saying like, you have to go to Atiyyah, like she's going to help you out. Right. So it's just more fruitful for me, to be honest, to spend time networking at the conferences, to not only meet new connections and of course potential clients, but to just also like strengthen my network. And my history with networking is actually quite funny, because like I did a master's in genetic engineering, right? So I never thought I would have to network in my life. Like I remember I graduated from school and I had very good grades, and I was, very, very well-rounded candidate in my opinion, and couldn't find a job for like 8 months. I graduated university or graduated grad school. And for like 8 months, I must have applied for like 145 jobs. Like I had a whole spreadsheet and a whole thing about it. And nobody was getting back to me, and I couldn't figure out what I was doing wrong. And so then I went into the summer, like time, my university offers a career counseling for graduated, like alumni can come in and do it. And so I went into the career office, and I like had, a whole list of all the places I applied, and I showed her like the 17 versions of my resumes I developed and all this stuff. And the first thing she asked me was like, and so how often a week are you networking? And I was like, I'm in science. I don't have to, like, what is this? I'm like, I don't have to network. I was like, no, I'm not in the business program.
Oh.
And she was like, no, but you still have to network. And I was like, no, but I'm not in business. And she was like, you have to network. And so I actually read this really interesting book that she recommended to me called The 2-Hour Job Search. And it was basically just about several things, but it was kind of about having a process for hunting for a job, not just applying to everybody online, but it was also about like how important networking is. And so I began to do it a little bit, and I was able to land a job through, at the time, my boyfriend's aunt or something. And what I learned from that process was like, I was hunting for a job. And so it was very important to me, from what I grasped or what I learned in networking, was that in every interaction that I had with people, to mention that I was looking for a job, and to be very succinct about what I was looking for, and to also relay with a lot of passion what I wanted to do. And I did that for like a month or 2 month long period before I landed my job. But even after I landed my job, my first career, basically, I had so many people that I had met in that month or two period messaging me like weeks or months later being like, I remember that you're interested in this. And I know somebody who like works at Syngenta or like Monsanto, because that's what I was looking for at the time originally. And that was kind of my first glimpse of like, oh, hey, like, when you really tell people what you're looking for and you engage with them in deep conversations, they remember you and they remember what you said to them and they remember what you asked for. And so then networking still went on the back burner. Then I moved to the cannabis space. My first job at Agmedica did not involve a lot of networking. I went to a few conferences here and there, but it was not really my job. My second job, however, my title, despite the fact that I was running a farm, was director of business development, which is like a title that I picked. Like when I got that job, they were like, write whatever job description you want, give yourself whatever title you want. Like we just want you. So just do whatever you want. So I for some reason, like wanted to be in business development. I wanted to move out of operations and I wanted to get into business development. So my title was director of business development, which meant that I had to do all the business development. So I remember the first year that I was working there, I got to go to MJ BizCon, but our company was like kind of just starting up. So I had to go alone. We didn't have like the budget to send, 15 people. So here I am at MJ BizCon. I'd been to like maybe 2 cannabis conferences before that and always with like a group of people, like a safety net. So I was kind of alone. And I went to MJ BizCon both days. I maybe knew 4 or 5 people and I like clung to them. Like I knew this guy who worked at Groden. I would like hang out at the Groden booth quite a bit and like try to be with him, but I would like try to force myself to do a bit more pushing out of my shell. I came back to my hotel room both nights and cried for like 2 hours. And I am not somebody who cries very often at all. I'm not like I would say an overly emotional person. I was not crying out of sadness. I was overloaded. I was overloaded with the amount of social interaction. I thought I wasn't doing it well. I am such a perfectionist, which I'm sure you know. So when I felt that I wasn't networking, like I would come back to my room and I would see that I'd only gotten 5 business cards for the day and I would cry and freak out and be like, I have failed my company because I did not get enough people to talk to me that I didn't know today. So it's just funny because I meet so many people now that are like, you are one of the strongest networkers I know. That was me like 6-7 years ago, crying at MJ BizCon in my hotel room. I went to this like ramen place for dinner one night by myself, like sad little MJ BizCon dinner, went back to the hotel, cried for like 2 hours. They were having a Health Canada audit. So I got on a call at 4 o'clock the next morning or 5 o'clock the next morning to do a Health Canada audit that we were doing. Went to the show, same thing happened again. And so I kind of learned that like, I know that I'm not actually a naturally social person. I would really like to be by myself most of the time. I really like to be alone. I'm a very solitary person, but to run your business really well and to do well in this industry in particular, networking is extremely important. So that is why I go to between a dozen to 2 dozen events every year. That's why I speak at least a dozen events every single year. Like I have 3 speaking engagements in the next month. Like, and so, I mean, that's good. And if three events I'm speaking at, but I'm actually speaking 5 times the next month. And so I think like networking is very, very important. And it's something that when you go to shows, you don't have to be as hard on yourself as I was crying in a hotel room, but you do have to like be disciplined. It's very natural when you have friends at shows to like stick with them and not really speak to anybody else, but you do have to look at ROI, which is like how much time and money have you invested to be here and what do you want to get out of it? Networking is not a direct ROI. I'm not going to meet somebody one time and be like, okay, well, I spent like $3,000 to go to this conference and I met 2 people and they're going to both lead to sales. That's not how it works. It's like a cumulative ROI across multiple events. I may sign a client after the 7th time I've seen them. So if I look at the 7 events that I went to and every time I interacted with them, went to dinner with them, went to a drink with them, whatever it is, that's actually how the ROI works. Now, I don't do those calculations personally because I don't have time to, but frankly, if I did, I really feel like when I look at all the clients that I've signed and all the times I interact with them at conferences, the conferences do pay for themselves, but I am a very serious networker. So yes, I hang out with my friends at conferences, do not get me wrong, but I make sure that I spend time engaging with people that are of interest or people that I think, we could collaborate together. And I don't go after people strictly because I think they're going to be a client. I don't just run up to people like, oh, I think you're going to buy something from me. I interact with anybody who wants to speak to me. I interact and seek out people that I think are interesting or that are doing cool things in the industry because it's like, you never know. I met somebody at a conference one day and we just ended up chatting at a booth. We were both visiting a friend at a booth or something. We chatted for like an hour and a half and he came around like 3 years later and was like, I have a tissue culture project that my friend has. And I told him he has to do it with you. And I was like, thank you. And so that's how a lot of networking is. I think if you just are really passionate what you do, you go in with a good attitude and you're friendly, you will be able to meet like lots of people. And then for me, at least, because I probably interact with hundreds of people at a show, I have a little proven kind of post network event kind of follow-up. So at the end of every conference, I take a photo of every single business card, front and back, and then I upload them into a Google Drive that I've developed for that event. And then within the next 2 days, I have to force myself to go in and transcribe all the information. My assistant does that now, but transcribe all the information from the cards into an Excel. And then I also drop in notes of exactly how I met them and what we talked about while it's fresh in my head. So I'll be like, okay, I met them at the GCNC C-suite mixer. They were talking about this. They were wearing this. I talked about that, blah, blah. We discussed, we both live in Canada and we both like work in the cannabis industry. And then by the next week, the beginning of the next week, I send out my first like volley of emails to every single person on that list essentially. And then depending on whether it's like a soft connection, like, oh, we just chatted and it was fun, or if it was like a serious connection, like they want a service immediately, that will dictate the level of follow-ups that I give. So I don't network for like, I'm a serious networker. Like I am here to like make genuine, solid connections. Yeah, I'm here to make genuine. I think it's a waste of time. I think if you meet someone at a conference, you have a good conversation, you get their card, you don't follow up, you've just wasted, in my opinion, both of your time. It's about networking is not about meeting someone one time. Networking is about meeting someone, having a follow-up call, developing a real relationship, not best friends, not going to see each other every day. But I would say the majority of people that I've like spoken to at conferences, I've interacted with multiple times now, that they know who I am, they know what I do, they know what services I offer. The amount of people that come to me who I've met at a conference 2-3 years ago and say, I know someone who needs GMP, you were the first person I thought of. That happens all the time. And so I think I put a lot of time and effort into managing my network, into mining my network, into also being reciprocal. Like, if anyone asks me for anything, people will random cold reach out to my LinkedIn and say, I'm going to get into cannabis consulting and I've been following your career and I want to talk to you. And I will talk to them for hours. I will give them templates of my contracts. I will give them advice on tools to use. Like you have to really put a lot out to get a lot back. But I think that like networking is one of the most important things you can do. I think going to shows and them being in person, I think, post-COVID especially, like when you and I see each other in person, it's just like one of those things where it's like we talk online all the time, but like seeing someone in person, being able to like, if you're friends, of course, hug them and like be near them and be, see them face to face is such a really magical experience. And that's why I go to so many conferences. I have got to spend well over 6 figures on travel every year, like without a doubt, for sure. Like I haven't actually checked for this year, but yes, I have spent a lot of money on travel, on hotels, and going to conferences. And I feel like all of that has just been an investment into my business and also into my personal development.
Boom. Super interesting, Tia. I think a lot of people will have like reassessed what they've been doing, going to all these events. I know loads of people that go and drink beers and it's easy to do.
That's one strategy. And I'm not saying you can't drink the beers, but also get the business cards, make some genuine connections and follow up after.
Yeah, boom, the follow up. Thank you for the Tia tactic there. Tia, super nice. Now that you've kind of, the year's coming to a conclusion, coming to a bit of an end, from your journeys, your travels this year, what would you say are some of the key trends or kind of like red flags that you've seen from 2025 and then heading into 2026? What are you sort of seeing on the horizon, do you think, Tia?
I would say that we're seeing a lot of people getting quite interested in getting, I call them Cannabis 2.0 products because I'm from Canada, but they're basically just extracts. It's Canada that we legalized flower first, and the second round was extract. So we're seeing a lot of uptick in these 2.0 products moving into the markets like Europe and Australia and the UK. And it's very fascinating because I find like there's this extra layer of like a step essentially in Germany where like compounding or like some kind of processing has to occur at the pharmacy. And so that makes it like a very different ball game than other countries where we can get the finished product to the pharmacy and they just hand it over. So for example, you buy gummies in Australia, you just send finished gummies to the pharmacy and they just hand it to the client. And in Germany, they would have to do some kind of processing or down packing of the gummies at the site. So we are seeing a really big uptick in people's interest in extracts. It got very low because, people just couldn't really move them into Germany, and that's the biggest market, and people were kind of fixated on that. So now that people are starting to think of ways and find ways to get them in and be innovative about that and to move products, we're seeing a bit of an uptick in that. which is an interesting. Quite a few of the GMP projects we have now include, solventless extraction or hydrocarbon extraction or ethanol or CO2 or something along those lines. A lot of them have some kind of extraction going on. And then I think one of the other big trends that we're seeing, just generally speaking, is kind of people getting into co-packing and to offering GMP co-packing services. Ancillary services are very big. And like, frankly, when I actually talk to people and they say, what would you invest in? If you had, $1 million right now, would you invest in the cannabis industry? It's actually not cultivation for the most part, to be honest. I really feel GMP co-packing, analytical testing, tissue culture, that's why I started my tissue culture company in Bangkok. Those are the things that people need, and they are all a relatively high barrier from a knowledge perspective and a skill set perspective. So it's less flooded. And so those things are all, again, we have clients in emerging markets who are doing their GMP facilities. And so many of them are doing a testing facility as well. They're doing tissue culture. They're adding all these things where, don't look at just your path forward to becoming a brand in Germany or becoming a product in Germany because it's super saturated. Look at other areas that you can, be successful and basically create value in the industry that aren't so self-serving, being a testing lab, offering tissue culture, I'm never going to have my name on a product in Germany, and that's okay. That's totally fine. I might have the genetics or the other things or been a piece of the puzzle on the way there, and that's sufficient for me. So I think a lot of taking kind of a back seat to sort of this, I'm going to have this super successful worldwide, big brand. A lot of people have now realigned and realized it's not going to happen. And it's also not the best path forward. It's kind of like making it as a singer, you can love to sing as much as you want, but the amount of famous singers there are to proportion is quite low. And so you have to have reasonable expectations. A lot of people want to establish brands globally. The infrastructure for that is insane. You would have to have sales teams in each continent doing work for you. It's quite expensive. It's quite a lot. So we get a lot of people that come for international strategy consulting, and we kind of go like, okay, this whole thing of being a worldwide brand in a year and a half is not going to happen. Let's pick 1 or 2 markets. Let's also talk about what's involved in that process. And so we're seeing a lot of people being a bit more smart about how they enter a market. I'm always a big fan of, try before you buy. So if you want to do a GMP packaged product in Germany and you're not GMP, get a GMP co-packing partner. We have a bunch of them. Use one of them and get some product in and land it there and see how it goes. And if that goes well, okay, great. Now you're going to invest into bringing the infrastructure into your building. Now you're going to invest into getting a sales rep in Germany. This kind of, hitting the ground really aggressively and running for most cannabis companies has been a consistently bad decision. So just being a bit more careful and a bit more strategic. We're seeing more companies doing that and spending more time, not rushing in. I think the whole concept of I've got to be first, I've got to be first, I've got to be first. It has failed so many times in so many countries that a lot of the people that are doing very well are the ones who are like, okay, let the front runners, let them go ahead. And let's watch what they're doing, what their mistakes are, and let's take more time to get our project forward. So I'd say the shift I've seen is, clients coming into me in January of this year saying, I want my GMP certification. I want it as fast as possible. Get it for me right now. To clients saying, okay, you know what? We want to take actually 3 months, just talk to you and figure out what we want to do for strategy and talk about what makes sense and what we can look at for the facility and go through a proper financial model and a plan. They're just being more strategic, which is just beneficial for all of us because anytime we see a lot of downturn in the cannabis industry, a lot of bankruptcies, a lot of failed businesses, it reflects poorly on all of us. It makes other industries not take us seriously. It hurts people in our industry. It hurts bottom lines in our industry. Financial problems, non-payment of bills, things like that. None of that is good. None of that is a good look for the industry, and none of that is good for the cannabis, people who are inside of it.
Thank you, Tia. I think we could talk all day, honestly, Tia, and we'd just rattle off a million different topics. But I wanted to maybe ask you 1 or 2 more questions, if I could, Tia, and then we'll call it a day, and we can maybe continue the conversation offline or. Again, something for maybe people to come and actually interact with you with. So I think maybe final question I want to talk about some current events, honestly, dear, because there's lots of cool stuff going on internationally, I think. First of all, quick one. Donald Trump talking about cannabis legalization. Recently posted a little video about cannabis and aging and potential uses around what that could mean for the American health. And with America becoming healthy again, do you think there's anything there? Is it just a teaser? Do you think there's any possibility that there could be turned around and there's a sort of rescheduling of cannabis in the US, and I think I'm more interested in like the potential repercussions and impacts of that, because a lot's moving very quickly in Donald Trump's Washington. If something happens like that, what do you think the repercussions could be for the rest of the international industry? Would it be more recreational adoption? What could it look like, do you think, Tia? Should that?
Yeah, I had the same question actually on a webinar that I just did when I was in Thailand a week or two ago, and I feel like everyone's quite excited about the prospect of the U.S. Getting involved in the global cannabis space. I'm frankly not. I don't think it will have much of an impact, and the reason for that is nobody in the U.S. is GMP certified. I would imagine that very, very, very few people are. I did get some GACP inbounds for the US this year. So people were curious about it and looking to maybe branch into that area. They are not. I think it's kind of the US towards cannabis externally is the way I look at the US, which is like, I'm not that interested. I can't really do business with the US because a lot of my work is global cannabis. And so because of that, they're kind of ticking along, but I don't really pay that much attention. And I feel like US cannabis for the majority is that way towards the global cannabis space, which is they're like, I can't play in that sandbox. So I don't really know what's happening, what's going on. There's very few people in the US that are geared up for what would be international trade at this point. And so I think even if it legalized tomorrow for some reason, there would be a very, very long time until we really saw flower moving, at that rate. And I do people, say, oh, all the Cali brands, most of the Cali brands have pipelines into Germany. Most of the Cali brands find a subcontract grow somewhere else in the world that is legal to export. They grow their flower there and they ship it into Europe. This is what all the big brands in Europe, I know several of the big Cali brands, and that's what they're doing. And the reason is that if you really want to play in the international market space, you will find a way. If you're not in the US, you'll find someone else to do it for you. And so these kind of contract grows or subcontracting flower, all this stuff, it's all possible, and they're already doing it. So yeah, I mean, is there going to be some kind of extra allure came from the Cali facility? I mean, potentially, maybe, but also cost of production. Does it make sense to produce it in California or in Thailand? I mean, where does it really make sense, right? So I would be really surprised if the US legalized and there was some like very, very large scale global impacts. I think that frankly, the best thing for the US rescheduling, whatever it is, whatever that ends up being, is actually just between state trade, because they can't even move product between their own states. That's actually going to be a really big difference. There's several states, of course, that don't have any cannabis, and those are going to become prime opportunities to flood with other product from other states that can bring it there. For sure, there will be some U.S. companies that decide to branch out, but the scale of U.S. cannabis companies, by and large, is very small. Like when I was first in the Canadian cannabis industry, I worked at a 1 million square foot farm. Like I said, my second job, there were like 5 other 1 million square foot cannabis farms, like in a kilometer radius. Like they were just right there. And so, I mean, we had so much volume. That size of facility in the US was like unheard of at the time. You'd see these like large Cali facilities, and they were like maybe 50, 100,000, 200,000 square feet, completely different scale altogether. And so there are a lot of cannabis producers in the US, and I do know quite a few of them, but their scale is quite small. So to be able to produce in GMP world, I'm looking for a minimum 50 kilo batch. I don't really want anything below that. So a lot of facilities don't produce at that size anyways. Like they do sometimes a single batch, and because they're selling to the domestic market, they're doing 10 or 15 strains in a room, and they're doing small quantities, right? So I think the US would take quite some time to align to be a global player in the international space. And so that's why I don't feel that if it legalized even tomorrow, there'd be a big impact. And the biggest thing that I find interesting about the US and also challenging is I think it was actually, frankly, a mistake to allow individual states to do legalization from a regulatory standpoint, because lacing together those frameworks is going to be a nightmare. Like as somebody who does regulatory work, like that sounds like my number one nightmare. You would either have to say every state can have their own stuff, and it's just whatever you want, in which case you're not doing like a like to like, one state's testing versus another state's testing. Like they're very different. I have consulted for state clients in the US, and between states, it's like night and day. It is very just like, Canada is legal, and then we might have differences in retail between the states, but this is like completely different. So if I'm in state A and I've got microbial testing and I've got requirements and I've got tracking, and then state B is legal but has none of that, I don't really want their product in my state. I want us to be kind of on the same line. So they'll likely have to develop a kind of national standard, likely, that they can say, okay, look, all of you can come up to this level, and this is the new level, and then therefore it's going to take time for everyone to get there. Or they can say, look, if some states have them, you can keep it, and the ones that don't have it, you have to adhere to that. All of this is a lot of work. It's a regulatory like quilt, essentially. So frankly, I think it's always good when anybody is looking towards decriminalizing or legalizing cannabis. I don't think there's enough medical evidence to support that it's harmful. I don't think that, generally speaking, we should tell adults what they can and can't do. I'm just in general opinion that all adults should be allowed to do whatever they want. And so I'm very happy for that change to happen. But I think from my perspective, as somebody who like consistently deals in the global cannabis space, it won't be on my desk or my radar for quite some time.
Thank you, Tia. It's quite interesting, isn't it? It's like almost like a little continent of its own with lots of little micro countries that all answer to the big boss at the top. So thank you. I think that's very, I mean, I could ask you a million more. I think there's a lot more discussion. That could be a podcast in itself, honestly, I think. Something that I'm noticing maybe is a bit of a final topic for you, Tia. We've sort of got two ends of the supply chain, I think, between yourself and I speak to a lot of doctors at the moment. We're doing a lot of training for doctors, which is a very nice thing to be doing. But I think a lot of them, particularly on the clinical side and in the healthcare profession, are quite disconnected from what really goes on in terms of like cultivation operations, the supply chain, processing, packing, storage, everything else in between. And we've got a bit of a, particularly in the UK, there's just been a little review by the government to look at what's going on in these clinics, what sort of standards are they adhering to, and a lot of the, I think, same issues that you've seen in the cultivation space is sort of quite apparent in the clinical operational side as well, with regards to standards, what's the conventional way of doing things, how's the best way to triage patients, for example. What do you think those healthcare professionals and doctors, nurses, pharmacists should know about the cultivation side of things, particularly like the products, challenges with them? Because we're seeing a lot of mold, for example, at the moment, a lot of product recalls. And I say a lot, enough that it's an issue that's not being really addressed or something that's reoccurring in sort of the patient forums, let's say. What do you think healthcare professionals should know? What do you think doctors should know? And is there stuff that they're maybe not aware of or overconfident or over-reliant on?
I think, like, generally speaking, all doctors, nurses, etc., should have like 2-3 hour crash course on cannabis production. You know, and the reason for that is, and I wouldn't expect them to have that for Tylenol production, for Panadol, whatever it is. Cannabis is an agricultural product, and it's inherently variable. And so because of that, there needs to be a level of understanding. It's not always going to hit the same every time. I'm actually personally like not a big fan of cannabis being in GMP, frankly, like flower in particular, because we light it on fire to use it or you vape it. So, you know, having these stringent like microbial standards and all this stuff and these really, you know, crazy levels of control over a process. Realistically, on the GMP side, you're drying the cannabis, you're trimming it, and you're packaging it. Those are, and it's a non-sterile product. It just seems to me like a lot of overkill. And so I think, like, I guess my ideal would be that if more doctors and nurses really understood the process, that they could assist us with kind of lobbying to like decrease the standard. I mean, when we look at products being irradiated going into the UK and Australia, many people are very against that. And they think it's actually not good for the product to do it. And they think it's actually harmful to patients, medical patients, to smoke radiated products. Now, I don't think there's any data to back that, frankly. And we do eat a lot of radiated foods. There are several foods that get irradiated as part of their cleaning process. But I do feel that it does decrease like terpenes, for example, in many cases, and it does decrease the product quality. It affects the product, whether it makes it darker in color or it makes some of the terpenes come off or it makes the potency lower or whatever it is. There's always some effect. And to me, I feel like it's an unnecessary process. We know people who have done, you know, taking really dirty cannabis, like the highest microbial count that's come into their lab, and they stick it in like a little vacuum thing or like an enclosed space, I should say, sorry. And then they light it on fire and they burn it down in there, and then they have everything in an enclosed system covered in plates, and they run the tests and everything is clean. And so understanding that there's this kind of processing that happens at the patient level, and that, you know, we don't have to maybe hit these like really stringent standards. We see mostly a lot of medical professionals being like, we have to hit these standards, we have to hit these standards. And it's like, I don't think we really need to. And I would love to like work with a lab and kind of get the data on that. It's actually one of the working groups I'd love to have for the ICQSA is challenging the current microbial standards, because it also to me seems very crazy that Canada allows this much, and then Australia allows this much, and the UK allows this much. And so why can't all of you allow the same for all of your patients? They're all medical patients, right? They're all people that may have pre-existing conditions, maybe immunocompromised, all this stuff. So why have we decided that it's medically safe to allow a much more high-level microbial that is possible to actually hit naturally without remediating the product? And why have several other countries decided that you must remediate the product and have these really, really tight standards, right? So maybe education on that sense of, what does remediation really entail? What does cultivation really look like? What are the real risks here? And what is kind of like maybe an over exaggeration or like a paranoia about risks that don't exist? I think all of that would stem from having a better understanding of the tip to tail process from all the way from clones or seeds straight out to how the product gets to the patient.
It's definitely a big blind spot. We do a lot of teaching around sort of the endocannabinoid system and different diseases, but I think understanding some of the nuance that goes into the cultivation side of things is something that's kind of like I don't know, it's all a bit disjointed across the supply chain and no one really sort of speaking the same language at the moment. Final question for you, Tia, and I'll let you go to bed and have an evening. What do you think of the strain names at the moment that are sort of coming out? So I get a lot of pushback from doctors who don't want to prescribe AK-47 Kush, for example. And I mean, honestly, it's something that myself and some of the GCS team aren't big fans of. You get a lot of sort of like recreational encroachment over into the medical side. And it's also a bit off-putting for patients or for doctors or anyone, again, other industries that kind of want to like interact with this in some way. It's like, you seriously trying to tell me you're going to prescribe me an AK-47 and that's medical somehow, and it's definitely not recreational. What is your perspective on that, Tia, as someone that's seen more strains than most people on planet Earth?
This is a complex question because it's got a couple prongs. I am extremely against countries legalizing for strictly medical without recreational, because you never really get a medical market. When you have medical and recreational, and the barrier to recreational is very low, you will see a lot fewer medical patients, because you will only truly get people that need to use it for medical purposes to sign up for that program. What you have now in the UK, what you have in Australia, what you have in Germany, tons of recreational smokers. I would say probably as high as 80 to 90% of the patients in these countries are recreational users, and they have no other means to access cannabis. So they found a way to sign up for these programs, and the threshold is very easy. Like for most places, you just have to go and speak to a doctor on a video call and say, I have anxiety. And so, I mean, you very genuinely could truly have anxiety, but does that mean you're actually using cannabis as a form of treatment? It depends on the person. I have anxiety. I've used cannabis obviously over the years. Sometimes it's helpful, sometimes it's not. It really depends on the day and what I'm using, especially because the products are so different. But in many, many cases, people are using it not as a medicine. They're using it, they're self-medicating, or they're using it recreationally. What there is nothing wrong with at all. I think all adults should be allowed to use cannabis. But when you do not provide a framework for access, this is what you get. So because you have all of these recreational people going into the medical side, they want specific strains. They want to pay for Cali brands, whatever it's called, and Cali brand Bs and whatever it's called, and all the big brand names and stuff like that. Medical patients who are truly medical, and also those of them who aren't from a background of using cannabis, have no idea and don't care. They want to get whatever they think is actually going to alleviate the symptom, but there's just so few of them that their voice is so low. So when we see a lot of these, big brands who are heavy in the recreational market, heavy in the legacy market, making transitions over, they are not targeting someone's grandparent that's using cannabis for their nausea related to their chemotherapy. They are targeting people who are aware of their brand and aware of their legacy and aware of their products, which are predominantly recreational users. There are definitely medical patients who use these products from these brands. I'm not saying that brands don't have medical product, but what I am saying is that these kinds of names, AK-47, there's unicorn poop. What are some other good ones? Redheaded stepchild. These are all things that, yes, if I am a doctor and I'm prescribing something, it doesn't really make a lot of sense to call them that. But the catch-22 of that is, or I guess you should say the challenge of that is, we are prescribing products that, frankly, we don't have enough information on to really be medical products. Because, yes, the whole concept that cannabis can be beneficial is true, but the exact specific cultivars that have been studied in the exact specific trials are actually very rarely the ones that are prescribed. You've generally blanket said high THC good for you, high THC good for this, high CBD good for this, great. And then you're just prescribing whatever you want essentially. And there's so much more about the terpenes, about the individual effects, about how I would consume a cannabis strain versus you, and whether or not it would actually help with my medical issues or not, that I think it's at this point where I do think cannabis has medical benefits. I do not think in any way, shape, or form we have sufficient data to be prescribing flower and many other products that are essentially widely uncontrolled, in the sense that you have 150 different products that you prescribe to somebody who has access to all of them with no actual clinical trial or data or information to back them. So I would think it actually would be more logical, in my opinion, to categorize cannabis as a naturopathic product or something else with less level of stringent control. You cannot push cannabis into a framework as the same framework as morphine, which is what they've done. And I think it doesn't make a lot of sense. And so unfortunately, the doctors are going to have to deal with prescribing AK-47 and whatever else they'd like, because until we have cannabis cultivars that are specifically developed for medical, or cultivars that are rebranded for medical. Maybe AK-47, frankly, is quite good for glaucoma. It could then be purchased over by a company and rebranded as glaucomate or something, and it's a medication for that. Just like every other medication gets a brand name that makes sense to it. In the meantime, though, we have a lot of this going on, and I think the last piece of that's a challenge is that a lot of these cultivars were developed by growers, geneticists, breeders, and they want to, that name means something to them. AK-47 may sound silly to a doctor, or it doesn't make, but whoever bred that and spent the time and the love and the care to make it, they don't want that product typically rebranded as something else. They want that to continue. The developer of White Widow, Jack Herer's son actually was just at our cannabis club in Berlin. I don't think they want their products relabeled, right? They don't want their cultivars, but they want to use it. And whether or not the names are just funny to us or they don't make sense to us, those are the names that they lovingly picked for their products. So wiping them out in one way is considered to be also quite damaging to the reputations and the legacies that these people have developed or left behind.
It's interesting. We can't really get away from the recreational roots almost of some of the cannabis. I don't know, like the political transformation.
I just think we globally legalized for rec. We globally legalized for rec, and then people can do whatever they want. And then the true medical patients, the ones who really are not interested in recreational usage, that is where the market becomes much more open for us to standardize the medicine more, to rebrand the medicine more, to make it look more in line with other medical products. But as long as you still have the majority of your patients are recreational, the recreational industry influence will always be super heavy. And there's nothing wrong with that, but I see the frustration from doctors and medical professionals who really want to have this truly medical industry, and it just cannot exist in a country where they don't have recreational access. I just don't believe that that's possible.
It's definitely an issue for the UK, particularly. Like as you say, it's kind of under review at the moment, and the overlap and the appeal that seems to be going on to more recreational users, it's like being ushered in under a medical guise almost, and then making a lot of those recreational general brand promotional claims almost as well. So something's going on with the government, and they're sort of looking at it in the UK, but it'll be interesting to sort of see how that transpires over the next sort of 6 months to a year as well. But I want to say a big thank you to you. I feel like I've kept you up all night. I've still got more ideas and questions for you, but for people that would love to speak to you further, where can they follow you, get in touch with you, ask you questions, or get involved with AgCan or the ICQSA? Where are the best places to catch you?
LinkedIn, probably. I'll be honest, with LinkedIn inbox a little flooded right now. Just because I was traveling quite heavily the past 2 weeks, but normally LinkedIn, if you message me, I will get back to you. May not be the next day. I would definitely get back to you the next week or two. But that's where I find most people inbound reach out to me. I don't have any work-related socials. My other socials, as you know, are my travel content, because I don't have enough stuff to do. I need more hobbies. I need more things to fill up my time. So yeah, I would say that finding me on LinkedIn is a good place to go, or of course going to any of my websites and submitting a contact form. They all come through to me.
Beautiful, Tia. Thank you. As this gets emailed out to everyone, we'll put a few of those links in your profile, and people can just connect direct through to you and have a chat with you, Tia. But big thank you for taking the time to walk everyone through some of this, have a little chat with me. Let me ask you some of these questions as well about what's going on in the industry and what's coming, what's happened. Big thank you, Tia. What's the next event that's coming up on your schedule that people might be able to meet you at as well as a final? Not to
The
dox
event in Bangkok. It's doxing myself. I've got all my speaking engagements on LinkedIn. So if you're trying to follow me, it's quite easy. But the event in Bangkok that I'm speaking at next week, actually. Next week. Gosh, time is just flying by this year. Next week, I will be there for 2 days. So I'll be in Bangkok. And then right after that, I head to Tokyo.
I'm excited for more TikToks anyway, Tia, because it seems like that's your realm at the moment anyway with travel. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you so much for taking the time, Tia, and we'll see you in the next GCS podcast.
Yay.
How you feeling?